Heather. Um, I think Heather already introduced the organization that's sponsoring this, the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges Open Educational Resources Initiative. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Here's my overall plan for the session. Very quick OER refresher. The story of this textbook project, the main content of the textbook, the approach, some nuts and bolts on working with it as a teacher, and an invitation to you to get involved in improving it. So I wonder if folks want to say hello in the chat and just give your name and college. And if you want to add a sentence about what brings you here today, that would be awesome. I think we're going to be a small enough group that if you want to ask questions in the chat or raise a hand, we can just pause as those things come up. Yeah, so welcome. Okay. So I just wanted to, we start all these presentations with a refresher on what is OER, what is this new textbook paradigm, just to set the context for what we're doing, what we're about here. So open educational resources are defined as teaching, learning, and research materials that are either in the public domain or licensed in a manner that provides everyone with free and perpetual permission to engage in the 5R activities: retaining, remixing, revising, reusing, and redistributing. And what does that mean? That means that we can make and own copies of these. Students can do so. We can reuse them. We can actually, in most cases, depending on the license, we can adapt and modify them as long as we give credit in most cases. We can combine them. That's often called remixing. And we can redistribute them. We can share them out again publicly. So that means that no one is making a profit. The students are accessing these materials directly, and they have continuous access. It's not going to go away. It's not a 3-month subscription. And there's the potential for editing and revising sort of continuously, because these live primarily online. And how do you know if something is OER and not just free? So this is different from the Purdue OWL, which is copyrighted and supported by advertising. We look for the Creative Commons licenses. That's the short answer, is that there's actually a different license. It's not copyrighted. So Creative Commons is the organization that sort of articulates that legally. And these are the licenses that you'll see. Sorry about that. That's the quick overview. So I thought that I would start by just giving a background, like the story of this textbook and how it came to be, and what team has worked on it. Just to kind of begin with narrative. And I know we have some folks here today who've worked on it, who've been on that team, so that's pretty cool. So I had been teaching argumentative writing and critical thinking, sort of the bread and butter rhetoric course just after college composition at City College of San Francisco for many years, since I think 2008 was the first year I taught it. And we had a much beloved textbook, A Rhetoric of Argument, which was 10 years out of print. So we started to look and to see if we could get permission from the authors to still use it in some way. And I learned about OER and tried to convert that textbook, but sort of, you know, ran and hit a wall as far as the cooperation from the publisher and the authors. And I heard about the grant opportunity from ASCCC OERI and sort of decided to dive in. Oh, wow, that's cool. Thanks, Julie. You studied with Jeannie Fonstock. Oh, she was so nice. She wrote back to me and we had a nice correspondence. And then I think that it was just, she wasn't ready to invest time in the project. That's so cool. Yes, I love that book. It's such an inspiration. And so I decided to dive in and try to make an OER textbook. First, I searched and I found that there were so many textbooks for college composition, but I didn't find one that covered the material for a rhetoric course that I felt we needed. And so I applied for this grant and started to work on the textbook. But I think the background to that is that in teaching this class for so many years, I'd been having this conversation in my head with, of course, with the textbooks that I had used. And, you know, I had come to a place where I kind of knew what was compelling to me and what were the elements that I wanted to combine in a textbook. And I wanted to really dive into the process of wrestling with that and seeing how to make that possible. So I loved Rhetoric of Argument, but it sometimes felt like the other rhetoric textbooks that I looked at, commercial textbooks, it sometimes felt almost too rich, a little bit scattered in the number of things that it covered. So I was always sort of trying to think, how can I connect this piece that we're talking about with this other piece later? What's the overall arc? How can students sort of remember the story of what we're learning here and why? And I loved the book From Inquiry to Academic Writing because it presented a sequence of writing tasks that sort of built on each other. So I really liked that idea. And I loved They Say, I Say, the moves that matter in academic writing. You know, probably one of the most popular writing texts. I loved the idea of templates. I love the simplicity in the way you open that book. And it's just a pretty simple layout. It's not overwhelming. And there are all these things you can just use that are intuitively familiar and accessible. And it gives you that feeling that, hey, I could do that. And I also loved the feeling of having a book that I could go to and get to know and turn to for everything. And for us in our department, that had been Rules for Writers by Diana Hacker. And so, you know, you'll see that as the project developed, it sort of became inclusive of that kind of a handbook resource as well. And so I basically set out to emulate those qualities that I admired and sort of recombine them. And I think I've kind of covered these, but the other thing that was really important to me was that the textbook be speaking to and representing the kinds of students who I knew and loved from working at City College. You know, the sense of diverse ethnicities and perspectives, and that that I, you know, be inspired by sort of the way I had come to teach in dialogue with my students and the way I've been influenced by them as well. So I've covered some of this, but I wanted to emphasize concepts over not so much the vocabulary. That's something that I had come to, I had been frustrated with the way in which, you know, when you introduce the word warrant, students get very focused on the need to use that term, and they're sort of worried about whether they're using it correctly. And we spend a lot of time defining it and redefining it, and there's still confusion about what that term means. So I wanted to sort of de-emphasize the technical vocabulary and see what could be done with everyday language. A little more about that later. And let me know if I'm missing anything in the chat. Okay.
Nope, you're doing great, Anna.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just the story. The first grant was basically me with the support of my former student, Maria Chow, who had been a rhetoric major at UC Berkeley, who did some editing, and my mentor, Shagandeep Kaur from OERI. And I took a semester of leave to kind of write the book. I wrote about 2/3 of it as original content, and then about 1/3 I adapted from other texts. And it went through a peer review and revision process, and then we just considered it to be, soft launch. And yay, Maria's here. All right, excellent. She's a user experience expert now, and I'm so excited that she came today.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you were in my first rhetoric course that I taught in 2008.
Indeed,
yeah.
quite some time ago.
Yes. So we just launched the book to sort of see what would happen, but I knew that I wanted to do more, and I knew that the book needed ancillary resources. And, as I had started to use it, I had ideas for how to revise and improve it. So in the second round, we formed a team, and we set up a kind of a peer review process among ourselves. Natalie Peterkin, Sarah Amanda Swigert, Tina Sander, and Kimberly Brush. So we had folks from around the state in this small team, and we added and we created a lot of Canvas resources working with that LMS, since it's kind of universal to California community colleges. And then we all piloted the text in fall of 2020 and did again anonymous peer review. And then we launched those Canvas ancillary resources that next June 2021. So the next level of evolution, the third summer, we had found in piloting the book that a lot of people were using it for college composition. Even though we had designed it for the next level up, for the rhetoric course, people were finding that because we had written it in this, trying to be accessible and less technical voice, it would work for college composition, and there was a lot of overlap in objectives, and many people were teaching the rhetorical principles at that level anyway. So, but we saw that we needed to expand the content coverage if we were really going to make it ideal for English 100. So we formed a big team this time. And I don't know if folks are here, if they want to say hello from that team. I think Ryan Hitch was going to come. Who else is here? But we had sort of a much bigger and more complex operation going on, which still involved a lot of peer review of each other's productions. And we added nuts and bolts chapters for English 100. And we revised some chapters based on what we had found in piloting. And we're wrapping up the revision process for that. We're basically done. Still working with Shagandeep Kaur of OERI, who's been wonderfully supportive all along. So that's probably enough of the basic story. And then just really quickly, I'm starting to get very excited that this book is actually in use, and we've gotten some positive feedback. The peer reviewers all said that they would be willing to adopt the book. I think there were 6 different people. It was anonymous, mostly very good reviews. The second round, we had 2 reviewers, and they were willing to join that second round as part of the team of the book. So that was pretty cool. And we've started to get reviews. We've just barely posted it on the OER websites, but we've started to get some good reviews on Merlot, OER Commons, and the Open Textbook Library OER portals. And we've gotten quite a few page views. And I think it's over and downloads from Canvas Commons. Got some quotes here from faculty. It's always just the most amazing thing to find out that somebody's using it. And I wouldn't have known, but just to know that students out there are reading it and discussing it. And I think people are adapting it. I think Susan Staffenbill has remixed in it and, done some changes to it at Arapahoe Community College in Colorado. And I love that Sarah Sullivan of Mission College focused on it as standing out for equity pedagogy. And I received random emails from an instructor in the Philippines at a state university in the Philippines who was using it and said, "Can I have permission to make slides for this?" Of course. And then I was able to sort of track through various methods. Where is it being used? Is it being used? So I can look at usage data and see which learning management systems are drawing on it heavily. And I can see people's course outlines and syllabi, and people have emailed me. So this is that, it adds up to, I think, 32 colleges, which just keeps me going. And we haven't done, this is the first time I've presented on the book itself. So it's been a soft launch. So it's exciting to me that with the support of OERI, people are finding it and it is resonating. Yeah, so let's get into the core of this. What is in the book as far as the content? I want to give you some kind of a good sense of what you'll find there. Maybe you've already started exploring it. And Heather, I don't know if you could put that link in the chat just for the page of links that I made for today. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's the link to the book. So if you want to explore around as I'm talking, more than welcome. And then maybe questions will come up as you're investigating. So this is the overall table of contents. And I'll go into sort of the different sections of the book and the purpose, what you'll find there. With the help of Alex Sterling from Los Medanos College, I sort of decided to work with him to frame the book in terms of the purpose of academic reading and writing, and the idea that these are tools for thinking and for specifically starting in the introduction, talking about fast and slow thinking, and how everything in today's culture pushes us toward fast thinking. And that really the beauty of academic work is that it's a set of practices that can help us to slow down, look more closely, critically, carefully, understand more deeply. And so we want to celebrate that and see that, all of these practices are not just there because they're established practices or tradition, but they're there to promote better thinking. And that kind of slow thinking has professional benefits for clear communication and credibility in the workplace. It has personal benefits for decision-making in our lives, political benefits, helping us have a voice in the public sphere and participate in democracy. So the book frames academic reading and writing as tools for thinking. And it does that by starting out in the early chapters, presenting a sequence of practices tied to essay assignments for understanding what other people are saying on a topic, deciding what we think about that. Is it sound? And then coming up with not just the critical evaluation, but some original response of our own to further the conversation. So that kind of sequence from summary to assessment to response, I present that as the core of slow thinking and of academic writing. So we talk about how these are the kinds of essays that will be assigned in courses throughout your college career. So you've got to understand what others have said on the topic, and then you'll be asked to weigh in yourself. So we sort of practice the core moves for that. And that will lead then to ultimately working with multiple sources and synthesizing them in a research paper. So the first few chapters are centered first on reading, but reading with the purpose of figuring out an argument in order to write a summary. So chapter 2 leads to chapter 3. Chapter 2 focuses on really Toolman reasoning, sort of claims and reasons, counter arguments, limits. I use limits instead of qualifier. But then once you kind of have this idea of the structure of the argument, it becomes much easier to write a summary. And so this is a theme throughout, that I'm trying to work in these rhetoric concepts as they're useful for specific writing tasks that students will find in multiple classes. So, it's helpful to understand claims and reasons and be thinking about counter arguments and limits when you're reading an argument and trying to see, what are the pieces of it? How can I explain it? And how do these pieces work together, right? So that's a perfect time to be looking at and recognizing the structure of argument. And that chapter has a lot of sample phrases to look for, to identify, okay, here's where they're transitioning to explain the reason for this point. Or here's where they're introducing a counter argument. Here are the kinds of phrases that would signal that. We teach fallacies in the next chapter, which is on assessing how strong is the argument, and sort of break those down according to the questions we might ask about the argument. There's a whole section there on assumptions, checking the assumptions, and many fallacies fall under that category of having problematic assumptions. And then I teach ethos and pathos through chapters on those topics that are geared toward rhetorical analysis. So always thinking, what is the student doing? How will they use this understanding of trust and credibility? How are they going to apply that? And helping with the application. Kairos is in there in this chapter on forming a research-based argument. So as you're thinking about how to frame your argument, you want to be thinking about the situation of the argument. I think I've kind of already explained this, jumped the gun and explained the idea of, setting aside the technical terms of rhetoric in favor of everyday language. But I like to call that anti-elitist rigor. So I thought this would be a good moment to pause and just give folks a second to just explore chapter 4 that I've been giving some examples from, and just play around a little bit. Thanks, Heather. And see if anything is standing out, or if questions are coming up so far. If you're having responses to this approach. Yeah, thank you, Rosalinda. I totally agree. How can a student respond effectively if they haven't had a chance to sort of critically evaluate the argument. And I do like to separate those out. I have a separate chapter 5 on responding to the argument, because I think, it's one thing to decide if the argument is strong or not, but then there's also an opportunity to go beyond that, and to make an original point, building on that critical evaluation. And I want to open up students' sense of the options for that kind of original point. Yes, thank you, Noel. That's I have gone back. Initially, I didn't include all the terms, but I have gotten some pushback against that, and I realized that it is important to include them as kind of a bridge. Students will see them referred to elsewhere. So I've mostly done it throughout the book in parentheses. And I've mentioned, you may see this referred to as such and such. But when we have quizzes, there's never a vocabulary quiz, right? There's never an emphasis on, do you know the term? The emphasis is always, can you apply the concept? But I do have a reference list of fallacies, for example. And if you find terms that are missing that you'd like to see in there, it'd be great to know what's missing. I had one instructor say, I think students really need to know the phrase reductio ad absurdum. And she really was convinced that in upper level courses after they transferred, students would be expected to know that term in the humanities. And I just didn't think that was the case. And I asked a friend who teaches at Vanderbilt University, who's a sociology professor, would you expect students to know a term like that? She said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, I do include those terms, but I do believe that they're not the most important thing we can give the students. Okay. So here's an example of how, I'm still using these terms, false analogy and slippery slope, but they're coming under the heading of a typical problem with assumptions, assuming two things are comparable without justification. And so in section 4.5, I'm emphasizing this kind of common language. What's the problem with the logic? I'm not using the term warrants there. I've used it, I've mentioned it at one point, but I'm not using that throughout the book. And yeah, it's true. It can be helpful. And I understand that these kinds of terms can represent cultural capital and sort of the prestige of academia. And that can be important to first generation college students. I just think it's a balance because it can take so much time and focus, and it can send the message that belonging is dependent on using those terms. And I know that's true for some things about academic style, but I think that it's not usually true for rhetoric terms in other college classes. I don't know. That's my take. So here's an example of the kinds of templates I've been talking about. So in that section on critiquing on problems with assumptions, it ends with a set of templates for sort of how would you apply this in your writing process? How would you critique assumptions? Here are the kinds of phrases that one might use to do that. And that's pretty typical for the book as a whole, that many of the pages end with sample phrases for applying the concept in the process of writing an essay. And this is a la they say, I say. And I do get a lot of good feedback on that. I've had students annotate the textbook this semester. And, whenever they see the templates, there are always people saying, oh, I can use this. This is going to be useful. And that's how I feel when I look at they say, I say. And I know that, there are books geared toward academics that are sets of phrases. The Academic Phrase Bank from the University of Manchester is online, and there's also a book, an academic phrase book that I've referenced that are geared toward graduate students and upper division undergraduates. And so I think that, this is underutilized in composition classes. It's very popular in ESL instruction. And I just think that there's room for more than they say, I say. I tried to sort of do they say, I say for breaking things down a bit more in terms of the rhetorical move that's being made. I think so that's how my phrases in the book are a bit different from they say, I say. Okay, oh, and this is my pause to say, to see what responses and questions have come up. I know we've got the chat, but if you want to raise your hand and say something or add to the chat at this point. I'm happy to keep going, but stop me anytime. Okay. So then in addition to that kind of basic structure of, teaching, reading for understanding, leading to response, I think I say use a summary to launch an opinion. We've got these other nuts and bolts sort of handbook chapters. We've got the research process, which of course builds on the idea of summary and response and critical evaluation, but talks specifically about types of sources and databases and search terms and MLA format, works cited, in-text citations, all kinds of things. Great, thanks. I'm just checking the chat. Oh, that's great to hear. Others loving templates and focusing on content and structure rather than terminology. Thanks. Thanks. Yeah. So we do have grammar and punctuation, sort of an extensive chapter that we're going to continue to add to on that. And I know like Cynthia Spence, who's here today, worked on that. It's been great to use that as a reference, as sort of the go-to reference for my students for when they do individualized grammar work this semester. I can point them to the space in our textbook that they're familiar with, where it explains how do you correct this type of error. And there's a whole style section sort of inspired by Joseph Williams and talking about clarity and concision and characters and actions in sentences. So that's there as well for the students, when we have time and when we are able to emphasize that, we can do that. And as I mentioned, there are sort of extensive chapters on the writing process. So talking about lots of strategies for brainstorming, drafting, outlining, templates for those things. And then there's essay organization. So we've got topic sentences, thesis, paragraph organization, and connecting ideas, one of my favorites. So I don't emphasize transitions so much as, conceptually, how do you want to help your reader see the connection between what you just said and your new point? And that's kind of inspired by the They Say, I Say chapter. But also really drawing on the way this textbook approaches the Toolman argumentation. So since we have the whole section on reading and summary that breaks things down in terms of claims, reasons, counter arguments, limits, etc., then when we go to teach sort of connecting strategies, we can say, well, let's go back to those concepts. Is the next point maybe, is it shifting to a reason for the previous point? Is it shifting to a counter argument? Is it shifting to, maybe we want to limit what we just said in this next paragraph. So it's sort of allowing student building on that understanding of argument as kind of modular and relational in that way, to talk about transitions. And finally, there's a chunk of the textbook which is geared toward rhetorical analysis, and that emphasizes emotion, trust, and connection, really looking at argument in terms of imagining it in the context of a relation between reader and writer, and a relationship that involves dimensions of emotion, trust, and connection. And there's a section on tone. And again, all these sections talk about phrases for writing argument analysis. How would we comment on the style or the tone in this place? You know, what does that look like in practice? Give students a flavor of the kinds of writing that we're talking about. Okay, so maybe I better pause there again to see if there are responses to this, questions as you're maybe exploring the book, content-wise. Yes, thank you for mentioning linguistic justice, Rosalinda. And that's an area where I want to continue to grow. I want the book to continue to evolve. I just, you know, I've been reading more, and I went to the 4Cs conference and was sort of asking questions in the session with Asao Inoue, and I just ordered a book on critical language awareness. And I think I can do more in when I introduce and make the case for still learning standard English in the context of code meshing and in context of student choices about how to speak when in the context of power structures. So, you know, that's something I want to keep adding to the book in the way that we talk about standard English, for sure. Yes, Iris Ruiz. Yes, I'm connected with her on Twitter, and she was in the same session. So she is very inspiring to me. Cool. Okay, thank you for putting these resources in. I'm going to totally follow up on that. Thank you. So just a few more points about general approach. Connecting, of course, with critical language awareness is part of an equity approach. And, you know, just on a basic level, I knew it was going to be essential to be looking out for diverse representation in many dimensions. And I probably didn't list them all here, but I was thinking about a lot of these things as I searched for images with the support of OERI, finding images representing, you know, the kinds of folks that I meet in my classrooms, and trying to look at that as far as names and pronouns as well. It's amazing how many OER textbooks I would read and be like, oh, but we shouldn't be saying Jack and Jill here all the time, you know? Like, what about all the other names from all the other languages and cultural groups, right? So, so I've tried to pay attention to that. And also looking at diverse representation in terms of the kinds of topics that we mention in sample arguments and suggested readings. So all of this, I'm sure, is, you know, of course, for most textbook writers today in our field, but it's still worth emphasizing. Looking for images, trying to avoid stereotypical images. And another part, and you know, anything, you know, I got some feedback that I was using the wrong terminology. I was using a term that I had learned, you know, in high school that's out of favor. So I changed it in talking about African American vernacular English. So you know, I'm hoping the book will continue to grow in this regard. I'm sure it's not perfect. So if you find anything, let me know in terms of representation. Oh, that's a great question. Yes, I would love to figure out how to send out updates. I can definitely do that, Noel, and maybe you know, have a list of teachers who are using the textbook, and so what I could do would be to send out updates to that group when I'm making some significant change. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Yes, I do. So yeah, we have an English OER discipline listserv, which I would love for you to join if you haven't. And I think I put a link to the general ASCCC OERI resource page on the links list for this talk. And right from there, you can get to the Google group for English OER, or you can just search Google Groups for English OER and it'll come up. So that's a place, yeah, that I would post updates. And I tend to post updates on Twitter a fair amount if I'm adding new material. Yeah, thanks, Sybil. Yeah. So so moving on to this next slide, you know, one thing that I learned from professional development on equity pedagogy, and then also from Sarah Sullivan, who's a professional development lead at Mission College, who did an equity review of the book for this last grant and focused on, you know, her training in culturally responsive teaching. Sort of the importance of the affective domain and the importance of these implicit messages about success that we send. And Sybil is emphasizing that don't imply that students are likely to mess up. I was sad because one of the books that I loved the most, I loved the voice, was Writing in College from Competence to Excellence, which is an OER text that I did draw on and adapt, and that I know many people have liked. But I found that that I was editing it as I used it because there was a tendency to say, oh, and don't do this. And many students do this, but that's wrong because such and such. You know, and it can take up a good percentage of a section of instruction, just talking about what not to do. And it's a little bit embarrassing to read because it's like, you know, if I'm a student, I'm thinking, oh yeah, that the instructors must be thinking that they must be annoyed a lot of the time because they see a lot of these same problems over and over, and they don't want us to do these things. And we tend to do these things. So I'm really trying to move away from that. And I've done a lot of editing and sort of thinking about how do we start, always from the place of what can we do? What are the possibilities here? What are the options here? And minimize those warnings. And start from a place of we can. I use a lot of we can rather than do this. Yeah, I don't know if people have responses or. Yeah, thank you, Sybil. And I know there's still a couple places where I can improve this in the textbook. And I love that moment of, you know, students pointing out where there's a negative vibe, and then we can, because it's OER, we can go and revise it. And I'm really happy, Sybil, I don't actually know how to say your last name correctly, but we're connected on Twitter. And Sybil, do you want to say it?
It's Preby. It's very German.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sorry.
Sybil Preby is an English composition textbook author for OER. And her books are The Anti-Textbook of Writing and Writing Unleashed. So I'm excited that you're here and we can have this dialogue.
I had to come and support you, and I wanted to come and get ideas. So
cool. Yeah. Well, I want to go to your webinar. Yeah, so I mean, here's just one sample of me trying to do that. And I don't know if it's really the best example, but just there's a section on writing a short summary of a long argument. And I just wanted to convey that it's okay to leave things out because students are worried about that. So we can allude to the supporting evidence rather than describing its details. Summary can leave out certain specifics and then give an example and sort of include the students' let's imagine we want to summarize a particular kind of article, and just the sense of possibility. We might simply refer to all of this evidence with a couple of words like variety and profit. It's just one little example. And kind of moving on from that to other things about the approach, it was important to me to include audio versions of each page. It is a machine generated one, but it's a pretty good machine generated one. I can listen to it without wincing. So, at the top of each page, there's a play button, and you can, so I think that's so important to have multiple modes of representation of the material and different ways students can access it and engage with it. We've got visual maps, there's argument mapping in that first chapter, but they don't have to do that. They don't have to learn it that way. That the concepts are covered in the text as well. The images are really chosen to try to reinforce meaning, not to be decorative. And that's, we're still adding images. There are a few pages that still need them, but that's kind of a neat puzzle to see how can this reinforce the concept. And we've got annotated sample essays. So for example, just to show for each chapter, to show the concepts in action in the same way in which they're taught in the chapter for the kind of essay that's being described in the chapter. And we also have those essay assignments in Canvas set up with links back to the chapters. So it's sort of all of one piece. And you can have that consistency of when you're assigning something, that all the supporting materials are speaking the same language and linking back to the explanations. So, and that's true in the Canvas quizzes. So they do have automated feedback. And there are links back to the chapter, the textbook materials in that feedback. And again, the feedback is encouraging. So, often the feedback, even if they've gotten it wrong, it doesn't say incorrect, exclamation point. It's here's how you could do it. Or, yes, there's something to this that makes that answer appealing. We understand why you chose it. And here's why another answer is better, essentially. And yes, you can get print copies of the textbook. I pointed the arrow to the wrong one. It should be to this buy print copy, right from LibreText, right from the book main page. Anywhere you can click on downloads and select buy print copy. And it's right through the LibreText format. Right now it has gotten a bit bigger. It's $20 for that print copy. I'd like to create some briefer versions as well. But if you compare that to a commercial textbook that covers the same material, those could easily be, $100. And then other parts of the approach, we're really moving toward interactive elements. That is the textbook of the future, I think, is that as students are, if they're reading this online, they can be interacting with it. And we want to provide opportunities for that. And we started to do that with a neat technology called H5P that I wanted to give you a chance to sort of try out. This is, I think, the next grant. I would love to be making more of these activities and embedding them in the textbook so that you're not just reading, you're reading a little and then you're trying it out and reading some more and trying that out. So on the links page, one of the ones is to see, I think it's section 5.5. And if at the very bottom, there's a little exercise for getting them to sort of consider how they could build on a critical assessment. What are some ways, which recommendations would work? It's basically a multiple choice question, but you can see the feel of having that embedded with the automated feedback right away on the textbook page is a little different than taking a Canvas quiz separately. And here's the other interactive exercise I wanted to share. This one is actually allows them to generate ideas for a response to an argument. It just asks questions based on the sections of that chapter of the textbook. But it's just prompting them, and they can write a line or two. And as they, you can try it out, but as you click through the different bullet points here, you're just prompted to consider whether you want to add each of the various different kinds of original response to an argument. And giving students what a sense of, what could my 2 cents look like? How can I contribute to the conversation? What are the typical academic moves here? And when you get to the end of this, you can save your ideas as a text file. So So we'd like to do a lot more of those, and to have them for sentence style and grammar as well. And ultimately, there's the potential that it wouldn't just be there for them to try or not. It would actually be synced to the learning management system. So if the teacher says, read this chapter and, try the activities, then they could get credit in Canvas for having completed those activities as they read the textbook. And of course, I would love to have videos as well. And that's another thing on the horizon. And I'm thinking about how to do that well. So we are running low on time, but just quickly, options for working with the book as a teacher. There is an extensive teacher's guide, suggested readings, sequences of essay assignments. So kind of a description of what course structure might look like and which chapters and ancillaries we would use where. Some lesson plans and slides, and a section on teaching for equity with this textbook. Now, if you want to check out the Canvas Commons shell, this might be a moment to do that and ask questions about it. There's a link on the links page to that. Even if you don't use Canvas, you can create a free account and access Canvas Commons, just so you know. And so you can go right to that link, or you can search on how arguments work. And you can preview the quizzes and discussions and assignments there. And if you want to, you can import them into a Canvas course. When you import them, they show up as modules. So each chapter shows up as a module, but that's not the only way to work with it in Canvas. There are a bunch of different ways. And I have a whole other presentation that talks about how to integrate your textbook into Canvas. So you can watch the video on that if you want. But this is a little of what it looks like in Canvas. Chapter quizzes. And another option is to assign annotation. I think I mentioned that. You can use, here's what it looks like in Perusal, just with a bunch of student comments on the first chapter. And that's also in my other presentation that's linked to. It's more about social annotation. It's fantastic. I love seeing the students supporting each other and commenting on the text in the margins. And you find out what their questions are, and then that feeds into class discussion. So this is very much a work in progress. I want it to improve. And I would love to get feedback. There are links for that. There's a comments group where you can be commenting on the textbook pages, or students can as well, through Hypothesis, which is integrated in LibreText. It's an annotation platform. And you're welcome to, suggest materials we should add, or share materials that you want to open license. Just reach out to me. I would love that. Shout out to CCC OER Consortium's Open for Anti-Racism training. Yes, I so wanted to do that, and I haven't got a chance to yet, but I really want to. And we are just about at time, but I'm planning to do an annotation contest in the fall, and I will, have your email if you registered for this, so you'll hear about it. But I'm going to offer some cash prizes, but also recognition to all participants, like a certificate of recognition for an editorial contribution. So I will send more about that. If you're assigning the textbook and you'd like to have your students enter this contest in the fall, might be a neat way for them to contribute to the textbook, sort of an open pedagogy project that I'm exploring. And also possible TikTok contest. I'm thinking of ways to get student videos to complement the text, and maybe having a contest around that as well. If you want to start adapting, making your own version of this textbook or any other OER textbook, I did put a link to resources for getting started on the LibreText platform. So you can get in there and just start remixing and editing what I've done and what our whole team has done. And that is it for my official presentation. Yeah, thanks for the interest in incorporating the text into Canvas. I think I put on the links list, I put a link to the webinar on social annotation, and it's the same webinar where I talk about techniques for bringing the text into Canvas. And oh, shout out to Chris Wary, who's here as well. Thanks for being here. He's a member of the team and an inspiration with his own Rhetoric textbook from San Diego State. And I've used parts of that in here. Thanks for being here, Chris. Yes, okay. But I'm happy to answer questions and reach out to me if you see that video of the previous webinar and on incorporating the text, and I could be a resource on that too, and hopefully do some more on that in the future. Yeah, any last comments, suggestions? What more could we do? Anything where you got lost or questioned it, or as far as the platform or finding resources in the book? I'm in no rush, so I'm here to chat. Let me see. I've been going so fast, I haven't even seen who else is here, so maybe there are other contributors. Oh, a shout out to Maria Robleto, our student assistant. You were in a course that used the textbook in fall 2020, I think. Is that right, Maria? And she was a fantastic help in creating the audio versions and in editing, and also in helping orient me to TikTok and think about maybe possibilities for video in the future. So thank you, Maria, who's here. There's two Marias. Maria Chow and Maria Robleto are the two former students who have contributed a lot.
Anna, you have one question in the chat from Nita Gopal. Nita says, I haven't checked to see if the book has reading, so I was wondering about that.
Yes, we do have a kind of a curated list of suggested readings by theme and suggested readings by argument type, and that's in the teacher's guide at the end. So let's see if I can share that. Oh, I have to redo my share. Yeah, so we do have that, and we have a list of possible books to use as well that are on Project Gutenberg. I think we could add to it. Let's see. I have to do this for a second. So if I go to that, my assumption is that many teachers teach theme-based courses. So I didn't focus on creating a reader, but there are readers, OER readers, that are linked to from that general resources page for English. So We also have sample student essays, but here we have suggested short readings and suggested free online books. And these readings are all open licensed. So you'll find, of course, other readings that are copyrighted and freely available, or available through your college library. But these ones are actually open licensed, and we have them by theme. So that's what we've got. I can put that link in the chat directly for Nita. Thanks. Yeah, any other questions? Oh, awesome. Thank you for signing up. No. Oh, very cool. Sybil is saying that you're going to create a condensed book and have students curate essays, videos, podcasts. Awesome. Yeah, it seems like a perfect setup for open pedagogy to have students choosing the readings that are of interest to them as part of a research process and an assessment process in the course. So that's awesome. I will look for that. There's a textbook out of Oregon, Empo Word, which has a lot of student writing. Yes. I don't know if I've listened. Thank you, Rosalinda. Thank you for the recommendation on teaching in higher ed. I listened to a different podcast with Remy Collier. But yes, I want to learn a lot more about using social annotation. And I do think it's just kind of a perfect marriage of social annotation and OER, because you can't assign social annotation of commercial textbooks for the most part, or any commercial text, right? Or you have to have students pay for the book in order to assign the annotation. But yeah, you can't just get a PDF. But since with OER, you've got a PDF and you can assign it using Perusal or using Hypothesis. Hypothesis is the more open platform. Or even Google Docs, you can annotate in there. Yeah, so Remy Collier is the founder of Hypothesis, which is the open platform for social annotation. And that's the one you can kind of see here. It's integrated into LibreText. So if you're in a LibreText textbook and you want to make a comment, you just go to this little arrow at the top right and click it, and you've got a comment pane. You can click annotate, and you can do that. So this is a way that you can actually also give feedback on the book if you want through this instructor comments group. Yeah. Any other comments or questions or topics?
Hi, Anna. This is Nita. I just wanted to say thank you for this wonderful work. I just came across this book very recently. Until now, I had been using They Say, I Say. I had been using that for a long time, but had been also wanting to switch to OER. And when I found your book, and then I saw an email saying another teacher had been using that book too, I was thrilled because I felt, oh, okay, fine. That means what I found was good. So yeah, now I'm very thrilled. Now I'm going to sit down seriously and start my prep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, what college are you at?
Modesto Junior College.
Cool. Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, all feedback welcome. And I know, transitioning a course can be a fair amount of work, but
yes,
we don't have any course adoption grants at City College or anything like that. So it's just the motivated instructors who want to go OER.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I find the Twitter OER world to be very motivating. and a way to sort of get ideas and share resources. Yeah, thanks for that shout out, Sybil. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, as the English discipline lead for OERI, I've done presentations to English departments, like I think just one at Golden West College. But you know, if you're interested in sort of spreading the word within your department and you want to have me involved in that in some way, either presenting on this book or presenting more generally on English OER, you can hit me up. So yeah, let me know. I'm available for that. Oh, thanks, Paolo. Ah, Paolo Sapienza is my mentor in teaching rhetoric at City College. So I'm honored that you were here. Okay, cool, thank you. I will look her up. Any other Twitter recommendations? Yeah, definitely follow Sybil. She's awesome. She posts all the time and it's very inspiring. Yeah, and thanks, Rosalinda, for mentioning the district OER liaison about openly licensed readings. Yeah, I've just been finding it helpful to work with librarians to find, you know, because we teach a full-length book, and that's not easy to find as OER, to find, you know, a nonfiction book that's a good writing sample that's not a textbook. And so I've gone to the library to find out which books do they have available as ebooks with an unlimited license, so that you can have as many users as you need, for a class. And then I choose a book to assign that will allow the course to be zero textbook cost, if the students get the book through the library. So that's another key trick that I've just heard about. Yes, there really is a great community for OER. It's very energizing. You know, sometimes things happening locally on a campus can be frustrating. And so just connecting to that bigger world of teachers is really neat.
Anna, if you don't mind, I'm going to stop our recording now.
Sounds good. Yeah.